Welcome to Millennials Meet Liberty, your source for searing hot libertarian takes on the world's weekly headlines. Here's your host, Colt Thompson.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the 23rd edition of Millennials Meet Liberty with your podcast host, Colt Thompson. Welcome back to the program. I apologize for not releasing my usual timeline there on Fridays. This is coming out a bit late, but surely we will be back on track, releasing at the tail end of the week, namely Fridays from this point forward. So again, we are on episode number 23 here in January of 2020, and I'm ecstatic to talk to y'all and flesh out some of my thoughts on the week's previous headlines. What I'm going to speak about today are namely three things. I'm going to speak about the Boogaloo bubbling up down in the state of Virginia. I'm also going to speak in pretty good detail about the New Hampshire Libertarian Party primary and what occurred there and transpired ultimately what we see forthcoming in the Libertarian primary season as it heats up in the next few months going on into the actual election of 2020 in November. And then on the third topic of the day, I will specifically talk about the trade deal that Donald Trump and his cohorts there in the Oval Office secured with that of China, which, of course, is our biggest debtor/creditor nation relationship we maintain here in the homeland. So I'm going to speak about those three subjects because they really hit the media outlets in a pretty strong fashion this past week. So here we go. The first thing I want to speak about here is the potential Boogaloo or the murmurings that are going on social media and in the media and in the actual streets in the state of Virginia pertaining to the Democratic leadership and their idea that they are going to participate in some more confiscatory gun measures down in the state of Virginia, which is truly a southern state below the Mason-Dixon line. So I'm going to flesh out kind of what's going on there, distill it down for you guys, crystallize the important issues at hand, and really how we should think about this from a free market, libertarian, natural rights perspective. So Virginia, as people know, was the heartland of the 13 colonies. Many founding fathers, some of the most important people who wrote and authored the Constitution, many of their ideas, many of these people resided in what is now called Virginia, which was previously Virginia. And, some of them were a little bit south, a little bit north of there, but a lot of the big, powerful, influential minds that created the United States were from Virginia. So Virginia is an important state, if you ask me, historically speaking, when it comes to the founding documents of our nation. You can talk about Philadelphia and the conventions therein, New York City, which was potentially the capital for the United States before they agreed upon D.C. for reasons known to most people. As it pertains to the North-South divide, not having the capital in one of the two major sections, but moreover putting them in an exclusive area, not a state, but that's a conversation for another day. But again, Virginia was just one of these places where it was a stronghold of patriotism to be an American, where the revolution was talked about in a very positive light. And of course, here we are over 200 years later since the inception of our nation, and we now have Virginia with talks of a Boogaloo, or what some memesters online or some historians or anyone really looking at the situation describe as a potential civil war. That's what people kind of mean by Boogaloo, a take-up of arms against the dictators or tyrants in that state, and some type of civil war or conflict between people who disagree adamantly about an issue, in particular the Second Amendment and gun rights in general. So what we have going on down there is, for the first time in 26 years, per the results of the November 2019 elections just 2 months ago, Democrats have statewide control of Virginia from legal, framers type, legal framework, jurisdiction, all these type of things where they can create laws and they have dominion over the lives of Virginians. They have final, full-throated control over the state of Virginia. Well, what does that mean? Again, here we are over 200 years from the onset of our nation. And now we have a state like Virginia, which spearheaded much of the revolutionary conflict and war and ultimately victory and separation from the British Empire. Now we have this state that's, turning blue. It's ardently purple, and it's blue because it is now, outside of D.C., many wealthy counties in Northern Virginia, namely Fairfax, are part of the military-industrial complex or are homes to people who work for the federal government and bureaucracy. So there are very wealthy counties in Northern Virginia that make it a very different place from that of more rural or Southern Virginia. And now, of course, with this top-down leadership approach, in 26 years in the making, all of a sudden here we have this Democratic strong-arm government in Virginia led by the governor, Ralph Northam. So Ralph has a military and medical background, but despite his military background, is a left-leaning individual and, of course, leaning towards that of the Bernie Sanders of the world. While I'm sure he does not identify quite as a socialist, his ideas as it pertains to firearms are in lockstep with a lot of the socialist-type individuals who hate the Second Amendment and do not like gun rights, nor do they understand why we have these gun rights, and are really just littered with ignorant thoughts around why people might possess firearms. So this is a topic that's very juicy and meaty. I could spend a lot of time on. So the Boogaloo, or the potential Boogaloo instance going down in Virginia, is that all of a sudden, out of the blue, with the state government control of the Democrats, they now, based on what they campaigned on, are trying to implement universal background checks. They're trying to ban military-style assault weapons and ban high-capacity ammunition magazines, which are talking points and ideas that leftists and blue state politicians always parrot and try to put forth on their constituency. Well, just because these elected officials want to do these things doesn't necessarily mean it's going to resonate with much of the state. In fact, Virginia is a southern state and was primarily red before it became a battleground state because it's hitched to D.C. geographically. So there are some people, hearkening back to the days of the constitutional conventions and whatnot, who understand why they have the constitutional rights and Second Amendment rights to possess firearms, to defend themselves from a tyrannical government who is out to take them down and control them and socially engineer them with firearms. So it's kind of one of these things where, why would you strip the firearms out of the people who are defending themselves from the people with the firearms who have all the power? It's very, very simple. It's a visceral instinct of Americans who understand why we have these rights. There's a culture of rebellion and liberty and individual responsibility in this country. And there's a lot of that still in Virginia. So what is now sparking up is this Boogaloo, or potential civil war in Virginia, fleshes out from the fact that the governor is going to continue to put his foot on the accelerator with, following through with these background checks, weapons bans, and ammunition bans. And people are not having it. So all of a sudden you have hundreds and thousands of people storming the Capitol. You have hundreds of thousands of people lobbying for their local municipalities and localities to have what are called Second Amendment sanctuary counties. These are what they're being called these days, kind of like sanctuary cities for the left, where immigrants just hang out who shouldn't otherwise be here, legally speaking. We have Second Amendment sanctuaries. Well, while there's now over 125 of these kind of deemed sanctuary cities for Second Amendment rights, or sanctuary communities for Second Amendment rights in Virginia, it's just kind of silly and foolish, because ultimately the entire nation, per the Constitution, should be a Second Amendment sanctuary for people to be able to possess and own firearms to defend themselves and their liberties and their families, so on and so forth. So the idea that we need these things is very bizarre. And of course, you see leftists and media outlets pretending like all of these measures that are being put forth and passed by states are constitutional, and none of them are constitutional in any way, shape, or form or fashion. None of them. The Second Amendment is the Second Amendment for a reason. Very bold, crisp, important, and to be understood by the layman. Of course, they can own firearms, and there should be no restrictions on them at all for any reason, especially constitutionally speaking. You don't have to be a constitutional expert to know that's not true. And of course, these major media outlets with their left political bias are out there pandering to the leftist politicians who want to be gun grabbers and control and have power and excuse them amidst the public. And then they turn around and they say that people who are against these things, people who are in these Boogaloo type uprisings, they're far right extremists, and why they should be identified with people who are white nationalists and belong to the KKK. This is the type of fucking weird parallel, weird universe we live in, where half the country has psychosis because they think that the leftists and the narratives in the media are accurate around these gun operations going on, these gun uprisings. None of what these people are doing is wrong. No one's shooting any guns at the cops or the National Guard, which may be called into use to carry out this law, according to the governor and some of his companionship up there in the offices of the governorship. I mean, it's absurd. The entire thing is stupid. It's terrible publicity for the right and the quote-unquote far right because they are uprising. I mean, this doesn't even make any sense. So again, just to encapsulate this a little bit, Virginia being one of the 13 colonies, and now it is one of the, strongholds for liberalism, I guess, because it's situated outside of D.C. And the Democrats come in after 26 years of not having any control in the state, and now they would implement all of these policies as if this is what their people actually want, if this is what their representatives think that the constituents actually want. It is most definitely not. It doesn't make sense. You can win a campaign and have state control on things other than this gun topic. But of course, the gun topic is something that they're going to make some action on fast. So the whole thing is stupid and absurd. And I'm really disappointed by what's going on down there from a legislative perspective. I hope that people do stand up and they cling to their guns and they decide not to participate in this policy, because governors and state legislators are indeed breaking federal law and are going against the Constitution. So I think it's incumbent upon people in Virginia to not follow this quote unquote, air quote, law, because these are not laws. They're being passed, but they're not legal. Laws cannot be illegal. It doesn't make any sense. But again, I'm not here saying people should take up arms and do anything reckless against the people in the government down there. I never advocate for violence for any reason at all, but they need to stick to their guns, no pun intended. And just thinking about this, if you just noticed a mere couple of weeks ago, we had a gunman take out a couple individuals in a church. He murdered 2 individuals in Texas. And this whole thing in Virginia is on the heels of this instance. I mean, it's been embroiled for the past month or so, the buildup to all of this Boogaloo type nonsense. But if you look at the incident in Texas, it was indeed a law-abiding, gun-owning citizen in that church who quickly pulled his pistol out of his sling, shot the individual who murdered 2 people in the church. He pulled out his gun, quickly, did away with the individual who was out there to kill a bunch of people. So this is just a really simple, common sense thing. I don't need to go on about the reasons for gun control, but it's just kind of ironic that this entire thing is happening on the heels of this Texas instance, which of course got next to no media attention. What the media probably wanted is for there not to be a guy with a gun there to take care of this guy and for maybe half the church to be slaughtered so they could advocate for the very policies that are being put forth in the public in Virginia. It's stupid. So I just wanted to lend some credence to that gentleman in Texas yet again. I may have mentioned in a previous podcast because it really sheds light on what the true situation is, that people should have guns, and especially the people who are law-abiding, helpful community advocates and stewards of the greater good. We don't want the guns in the hands of the government or criminals or people who who are not moral. And again, the government is criminals and they are not moral. So we don't want the guns in the hands of the government or people who are set to harm and hatefully kill people. So the whole thing in Virginia, I sympathize with the people who are participating in the air quotes Boogaloo. I hope that they stick to their guns, again, no pun intended, that they continue to create these Second Amendment sanctuary areas of their states and to really honor the people who died in the Revolutionary War and the people who fought for our liberties and the people who had these ingenious ideas to build a country on free markets, civil liberties, private property, and your right to self-defense. Absolutely ridiculous what's going on in Virginia from a statewide gun control measure. And you look at other states that are doing things like this, like New York State and California, other states are flirting with these ideas, and shame on them as well. But I'm glad a state that has a little more fervent of a red-blooded American group who are not afraid to really take up some arms in solidarity, not shoot at anyone, but flex and express that this is their life and that they should do as they please so long as they're not hurting the lives of others. So the governor of Virginia needs to back off, as do the people who are in charge. They are not self-righteous enough to know how people are to defend themselves. They are, in fact, hurting people and dividing the country by carrying out stupid things like this. Shame on them. I want to dovetail now and talk about the other two topics that I mentioned because I want to keep this podcast at a half hour. So we're about halfway through. I wanted to spend the majority of my time talking about that Boogaloo instance down there in Virginia. I'm going to now talk quickly about what occurred at the New Hampshire Libertarian Party primary. The reason I'm mentioning this is because this is a podcast for libertarians or liberty-minded people, conservatarians, and what you saw transpire in New Hampshire was absolutely laugh out loud, stupid, and funny, and just a testament to how unserious the Libertarian Party is and the people within it, and even the caucuses of relevancy and importance. I mean, they are just, this entire thing is just a joke, and it's shameful, and I feel bad for people who spend money, time, and, volunteerism hours putting forth their best bet to get a true liberty candidate in Washington, because the Libertarian Party is never going to do that in our lifetime. I hate to be a cynical Debbie-Downer. It's never going to happen. It's resources and money being exhausted with no end in sight. But what occurred was just funny. I mean, it's laughing in the face of who I like, Jacob Hornberger, and his views, and someone who can articulate liberty and liberty positions and has been doing so his whole life better than pretty much anyone in the country outside of a few people, maybe like Judge Andrew Napolitano, Peter Schiff, Tom Woods, Ron Paul. I mean, he's right up there in terms of ideas and advocacy and knowing what he's talking about. And of course, he did not win the New Hampshire Libertarian Party primary. In fact, who he had was a gentleman whose platform entails promising people free ponies if he wins the Libertarian Party nomination, and moreover, the presidency if he were to assume the Oval Office. And this gentleman's name is Vermin Supreme. Of course, that's a dumbass name. It's just a joke. The guy's entire bit is just a shtick. It's supposed to be laugh out loud funny. I mean, this is a guy who is a grizzly, unpresentable, unkept beard who has a giant water boot on the top of his head upside down wearing as a cap. And of course, he's being a clown and he's being funny. And I, echo the sentiments that this is definitely funny in a way, but it's a shame for the actual party and people who belong to the Libertarian Party. Something I don't, that I'm not going to be a follower and just join it for the sake of doing it. I'll maintain my independence as an independent voter if I vote at all and move along from there. But my best advocacy and what I can do for the country and for the electorate is just educating people via this podcast. So Vermin Supreme wins this primary. Now, he has some staying power because I believe he resides in New Hampshire, but this just goes to show what kind of joke the Libertarian Party is. Now, they will not be ever taken seriously on a national scale. The two-party system will never be defeated by the Libertarian Party, ever. And what happened is Vermin was a Democrat for many, many years, and then he was a registered Republican for many, many years, and then he eventually wound up being a registered Libertarian, and that was his idea, how he would generate and garner some attention and espouse his ideas and, maybe entertains people along the lines of, his antics with wearing a boot on his head and looking like he was homeless and a vagabond. And that's what happened. I mean, I don't even know the foot traffic he had with his campaign in the state of New Hampshire, his home state. I have no clue what Jacob Hornberger's, delegates or outreach groups were doing in New Hampshire, but they obviously completely fucking flopped. I mean, what was going on? Was this ever relevant or important? I mean, people in the Libertarian Party Mises Caucus, which is the fastest growing caucus in the Libertarian Party, which also is creating the fastest amount of enrollees or membership cards in the Libertarian Party as a whole. I think they increased the party size by 15 to 20% in the last 6 months. I mean, what is going on if they can't even manage to beat this character named Vermin Supreme? Is that really the best they could do? I mean, they deserve a lot of criticism for that, for all of their gloating and accolades about how much money they're raising per month for Jacob Hornberger and Joshua Smith and all these guys who are great people I totally support. And that's the product you leave on the playing field in New Hampshire. What a fucking joke. I mean, there's no reason or excuse that justifies that at all. Even if you said that it was his home state and that Hornberger and any of these guys were not going to participate wholeheartedly because they wanted to spend their resources elsewhere. I mean, come on. Come in there and just fucking mop the floor with some fool like that. It's a joke. So that just goes to show people who are voting Libertarian are doing it as a joke or a throwaway or angry vote or uneducated or just don't care. Very cynical people. I mean, Libertarians are very cynical in general because they realize the government is so fucked up and it's probably never going to get better and power corrupts and people are just obsessed with power and the dishonest, most lazy, stupid people achieve, government positions and high bureaucratic positions within all ranks of governments. That's how it goes. If you're going to be honest, like most libertarians identify all these problems which are negative and the public doesn't want to swallow this bitter tasting medicine, well, of course, you're not going to become a serious politician or hold any of these offices. But there are things you can do when you're running against a guy who has a boot on his head and a dumbass looking beard, who looks like a vagabond, who's an utter joke, who's wasting everybody's time other than it's a mere publicity stunt to maybe embolden his comedic career, whatever the hell is going on. Who knows what this guy's motivation is, but it's hilarious. He wants to promise people a free pony, and there you go. He won the Libertarian Party primary up in New Hampshire. And who the hell knows what will happen down in Austin, Texas, come the delegates all gathering in Austin to actually nominate a candidate. I mean, this doesn't mean Vermin Supreme is going to be our guy going into the election, but it's just a dumbass way to start out 2020. It's really annoying. And it's just, I don't like all these people who are in these caucuses who are advocating for really well-intentioned people. And then like all of a sudden their social media facade of how hard they're working just disappears because they actually haven't been doing any work in person at all other than gloating about themselves. They're not actually getting boots on the ground. And it kind of reminds me of some of these, I don't want to trash the Libertarian Mises Caucus because I love them, but I mean, they have this Instagram account they just fired up, which is Behind the Times. And, they're posting like really childish, dumb videos on there as if that's going to like warrant anyone seriously, thinking about these ideas as if there's something like positive and good for their, community or their life. And I don't know. I mean, they're trying to like tag along with Vermin and just make their entire campaign and caucus a joke. I have no idea. It's just dumb. And they're also trying, I don't know if they're like trying to like rope in all of these young people to listen to podcasts because they're young and impressionable. I mean, these people don't vote anyway. It's all about the old people. So, have a little bit of balance where you can reach out to young people, old people, and be a little more mature and project your, strong bullets of why this stuff works and how to sell this stuff. I mean, it's hard to sell ending the Fed and it's hard to sell, abolition of major entitlement programs, but, find the things that are easy to sell, like be anti-war and, thin libertarianism, scaling back some of these government programs and reeling in the debt and slashing taxes. A lot of these Republican talking points, which are indeed libertarian, but we would actually follow through with them because we're libertarians. You'd like to think. I don't know. So the whole thing's really goofy. And then finally, I wanted to devote the last few minutes of this podcast to the third topic, which is the trade deal that the United States struck finally with China. A country that Donald Trump and our administrations had quite a bit of animosity and angst against since the onset of Donald Trump assuming the Oval Office. So in his campaign, Donald Trump made the claims that our trade deficits were totally out of control as a nation, specifically with China, that China and our trade deficit was completely out of whack. It was just goes to show that they were so productive versus us, who was not productive at all. We were losing with all these deals, and we were losing because we were not competitive enough, and all these things which are more or less accurate. I mean, there's a economic reason other than just we're not as productive than China that these, trade deficits exist. But by and large, it's because that is the actual reason. I mean, they're a furiously growing second world country that's enabling capitalism, in some areas that we are just not competitive with them. And what the deal spelled out was essentially, and it's one of these things too, which is weird because it kept, every time Trump said he had progress, there wasn't progress, and China would come out and say there was nothing. And every time China said there was progress, Trump said there wasn't, and that they all of a sudden evolved and morphed into, well, then there's going to be this phase of a deal, and maybe phase 2 of a deal, maybe past the election. They'd wrap the entire thing up. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, then we have some sort of deal, like they struck a deal, I guess. I mean, who knows? Because there's been so many deals that have fallen through. I mean, what makes this laughable is that this trade deal we struck with China, if you read in it specifically, it mentions that if one of the sides believes that the other side is not honoring the trade deal, they can just pull out and vanish with the deal completely. I mean, that's not a trade deal. That's something that's not a relationship with a nation that is enduring. It's something that's probably going to be, it's going to become worse, probably, our trade deficits as a result of all this. I mean, none of this stuff is probably going to happen. Maybe the clip of our trade deficits growing will diminish a little bit, but even let's say it does work in our favor, that the trade deficits seemingly disappear a little bit. Well, all it's going to do is just allow China to, so essentially, let me take a pause for a second. What the Chinese have agreed to do is just buy a shit ton of our agricultural products, whether it's, soybeans, corn, wheat, whatever, because they need to feed their nation. There's a lot of hungry, hardworking people that need to be fed. In the United States, there's a lot of agriculture. So we're almost operating as their colonial trading partner in a sense, because they're richer than us and they're producing all of these manufactured electronic specialty equipments that Otherwise, we would have produced back in our glory days when we were a booming, jettisoning economy. But now it's the other way around. We're the poor debtor nation to China, who is sending them agricultural commodities to feed their people. And we're living high in the hog because we have the reserve currency in the world. We're able to purchase all of these manufactured items. But what we really want to be doing is having a strong dollar and manufacturing these expensive electronic items and shipping them and exporting them other places. But instead, we have the agrarian-based economy as it pertains to this trade situation specifically. So I don't see how these deficits are going to disappear or shrink. I mean, maybe with China they will, and to the extent that they do, it's not because we're becoming more productive. I mean, China may just find their other trading partners all over the globe to absorb some of their other agriculturally based needs. And maybe they'll trade some of their products to other countries outside of the U.S. I mean, find other buyers. So in a way, we're just kind of shifting the trade deficits to other countries as a whole. On aggregate, our trade deficits are still ballooning. But with China, maybe they're diminishing a little bit because we've struck some sort of deal here where they've agreed to buy this stuff at a fixed price. And I mean, the whole thing is really messy and doesn't make any sense. So I just don't like the fact that Donald Trump just parroted these ideas of we're going to really take some swings at China and we're going to fix all of this. And it's all because, this is all a byproduct of bad trade deals in the past negotiated by prior administrations, that he's the art of the deal guy. I wrote the book on negotiating and playing hardball. And by all means, we're going to have the best trade deals and USMCA, USMCA instead of NAFTA with China or with Canada and Mexico. And of course, he's going to come in here and fix all these things. And none of these things are that different at all. They're not on the margin. They're probably not even better. Who knows? Just reshuffling the deck. All these deals he's renegotiating. He's slapping a tag on it saying they're the best thing that's ever been negotiated in the history of trade deals. I mean, they're not. They're similar to what Obama and Clinton and Bush and all these people were doing across the world. What we need is free trade. We need abolition of these agreements and people voluntarily trading, across the oceans and alleviating the businesses of the tariff burden, but moreover, alleviating the consumers, because that's who really gets affected by these tariffs and these trade deals and all these wacky things we have going on. I mean, countries shouldn't be negotiating these things at all. There should be a free market dispersed all over the world, bringing prices down to the lowest common denominator. But ultimately, I mean, we'll see what happens with this struck trade deal. And the market really didn't move too much on it. You think they would have shot up and the NASDAQ and the Dow would have been a lot more green, but that just didn't happen. In fact, what we had was more of a sell-off for whatever reason. Maybe that was kind of a buzzkill effect. Maybe we shot our wad early and they realized this really wasn't much of anything at all. It was a mere nothing burger and everything's going to be status quo. And maybe we should, invest differently and not as optimistically, because Trump didn't really follow through with these big grandiose ideas that he had with specifically trade deals. So it's just a bizarre world we live in where Trump's criticizing a country who's doing the right things in terms of economics, not in terms of how they treat their citizens and civil liberties over there, because it's awful to the extent, it's not North Korea, but it's very, very bad, and the censorship and the surveillance state and all of those things. But what we could do is look critically at ourselves and start slashing the size of governments, deregulating aspects of our economy, getting rid of taxation, dropping some of these tariffs, making ourselves inherently more competitive to the rest of the globe, where we could manufacture some of these high-tech equipment and cell phones and cars here and develop R&D and medical technology that the world has never seen. I mean, we could be these things if we, diminished and really took a good hard swing at the melon of government. But of course, Donald Trump is now part of the swamp that he vilified as he ran for office. And I guess he's going to do what the swamp does, because once you're in the swamp, there's really no getting out. You become, Jabba the Hutt, and there's nothing you can do. And the great Yoda telling you the right things to do while you like him and you appreciate Yoda and all of these Jedi. If you're in the swamp, you're probably not getting out of the swamp, and you're essentially on the dark side. So that's what I got for today's episode, talking about the Boogaloo in Virginia. Keep those people in your prayers and thoughts down there, that nothing escalates to point of violence and deaths, and make sure people ensure their rights down there in terms of firearms. And then, think about the Libertarian Party. And if you think voting for them even makes any sense, voting for these people or candidates who are libertarians, because are you just wasting your time and money? I don't know. Look at the Vermin Supreme situation and how uneducated and stupid and laughable the whole situation was in New Hampshire. And then moreover, looking at this trade deal with Trump, what you see is what you get. Just a lot of puffery and nothing substantive. So I hope this podcast was not a lot of puffery and something that was substantive and for something for you guys to chew on and reflect on. And I will see you for episode number 24 at the tail end of this week. Have a great day. Thank you.